Welcome to EJB Talks, Rutgers Blaustein School experts in policy, planning, and health, where we talk with our faculty and staff experts, as well as students, about how the fields of public policy, urban planning, public health, health administration, and public and urban informatics affect your lives. Welcome to another episode of EJB Talks. I'm Stuart Shapiro, the Associate Dean of Faculty at the Blaustein School, and the purpose of this podcast is to talk with my colleagues and our alumni about issues affecting people in New Jersey, the United States, and the world. One of my fascinations is the intersection between politics and public policy making. But I have to admit, few of my colleagues reach my level of obsession with politics. One of them who does is Associate Professor Julia Rubin. Professor Rubin teaches in our public policy program, has helped found the group Save Our Schools New Jersey, and has recently written an article on machine politics in New Jersey. Julia, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much, Stuart. It's my pleasure.
Can you start by talking about your recent history and advocacy and how you came to focus on New Jersey machine politics?
That's a great question. So as you mentioned, I helped start an organization called Save Our Schools New Jersey a decade ago. As a parent, it's a grassroots parental organization. And as I became involved in advocating for public education, I was really surprised to find that policies that were overwhelmingly popular or were overwhelmingly opposed didn't translate in those terms in terms of the New Jersey legislature. So, for example, I saw policies like expansion of high-stakes standardized testing or diversion of public education funding to private and religious schools, which were very unpopular with the population of the state, be supported at the state level by our legislature. And I wanted to understand why this was happening, why in a state like New Jersey, which demographically really should be a relatively progressive state, why that was not what I was seeing legislatively. And so I started looking into this. And what I discovered is that there are various institutional aspects of New Jersey politics that basically insulate the legislature from popular accountability. And they enable political machines to control the legislature. And undoubtedly, the most important and the most powerful of these is the county line. But let me stop with that for a second, come back to that one. And if I may, I can just go through what some of those are.
Sure.
So the way the legislature is set up, it is effectively managed, controlled by two people, the Senate President, the New Jersey Senate President, and the New Jersey Assembly Speaker. So no legislation can advance without their blessing. They decide committee assignments, they decide who leads what committees, they decide what bills a committee hears and what moves from committee. Even if the committee approves it has to go to the full chamber. They decide which bills go to the full chamber and get voted on. So no legislation can happen without these two individuals. And it has been men. Legislators who are in their good graces get rewarded, and legislators who in any way cross them get punished. They get taken off desirable committees, they lose leadership positions, and I can give you specific examples, but this has happened multiple times. They also control legislative leadership PACs that give them a substantial advantage in fundraising and enable them to reward their allies with campaign contributions. So that's not only in New Jersey, but it's really powerful in New Jersey. But a few other things that are really specific to New Jersey. So we don't have a statewide media. We have a lack of a statewide media. There's nothing that's read or watched by most of the state. And so people are getting their information from very different venues. And a lot of those venues are focused on Pennsylvania or New York. So the northern part of the state really focuses on the New York market. The southern part of the state focuses on Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And so New Jersey gets split up and there isn't like a unifying media presence. We don't have an initiative or a referendum process. So there's no way for the people of the state to go around the legislature. Let's say there was something we really wanted to enact into law. If the legislative leadership of these two men did not want to make that a law, it will not happen, regardless of how much people might want to. There's no way to put it directly on the ballot. We have largely non-competitive legislative districts. almost every district in the state. Maybe there's a handful of districts that's in play in any legislative cycle. And so if you win the primary, you basically win the general election, which means that those who control the primary process, those who can determine who's going to win the primary nomination, essentially put legislators into office. And then, as I discussed, they control what they do once they're in office. We have very restrictive laws around formation of political parties. We have the Democrats, we have the Republicans. It's almost impossible for a third party to form. And that's very atypical. New York has 8 political parties. Connecticut has multiple political parties. So there's all these institutional factors. And then the biggest one is the county line and the way our ballots are designed. Do you want me to?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
we'll come
please.
back to that in a second. I want to go back for a second and sort of talk about the sort of as a good social scientist defining your terms here. In terms of
Right.
machine politics, I mean that means lots of different things to different people. I think of Tammany Hall and I think of Boss Tweed when I
Right.
think of machine
Right. That's
politics,
exactly it.
and that had tremendous corruption implications. It also had the effect of bringing people into the political process that weren't in the political process before. But you're also talking about other things, sort of parties and media, some of which are true on the national stage. I mean, Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell have tremendous amount of power in Congress. So can you sort of laser in on what you're talking about when you talk about machine politics?
I think you were exactly on the money when you talked about Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall in New York City, 100 plus years ago. That is not that different from how New Jersey political machines operate right now. They are run by quote unquote bosses, and those bosses control jobs and other resources. And that's a patronage system, and that's how they maintain their political power. And they stay and power the machines by being able to deliver votes and campaign funding and boots on the ground to candidates to get them elected. And since New Jersey has a part-time legislature, we even have legislators who work for these machine bosses in their day jobs. And of course, legislators benefit from contracts and business arrangements, as do others who are part of the machine. And they could jeopardize that if they anger the bosses. So George Norcross is the chairman of an insurance brokerage firm, and he controls the most powerful machine, which is basically all of South Jersey, that accounts for about a quarter of all the Democratic state lawmakers. And then he makes alliances with other regional bosses in Middlesex County. Right now, there's a strong alliance with Middlesex County, and they control the state assembly. Their person is the assembly speaker. And Essex County, he's had a long-standing alliance with the Essex County machine. And this extends his reach. So between these multiple machines, when they form these alliances, they have enough votes from the various legislators that are accountable to these machines to decide who's going to run the assembly and who's going to run the Senate. And that's how they control the legislature. And then it feeds into this cycle where controlling the legislature allows you to generate all these other resources and allows you to get reelected and to become wealthy. And so it is very much the Boss Tweed Tammany Hall model kind of updated to the
So,
modern era.
so one thing about the Tammany Hall model is, of course, they also delivered things to the voters, either in the form of jobs or a sense of
Right.
community or those kind of things. What are these machines delivering to their voters that keep them loyal?
Well, they deliver things to their immediate followers. So, for example, in South Jersey, a lot of the machine kind of cogs are in the system. They work for a county
Hmm.
or a city. In terms of their voters, that's not really how they stay in power. The way that they stay in power is that they control the electoral process through the ballot. Now, if they did something incredibly unpopular, they would get pushback. It's not to say that we have no democracy whatsoever,
Right.
but it's just that it's because the state doesn't have a media market that covers the state. And because there's so much going on and the state legislature really doesn't get much coverage, especially as all media has shrunk and become much less comprehensive in what they can cover because of lack of resources, most people aren't following things that closely. So unless it's a really major issue that gets statewide play and gets picked up, people aren't really aware of what they're doing. So a lot of what they're doing kind of is almost hidden from public view. And there's all sorts of shenanigans. For example, posting bills right before they're voted on, not canceling meetings, not allowing people to testify. I mean, there's been some real ugly in process in the legislature. Certainly, if something is incredibly high profile. So, for example, a few years ago, we had the gerrymandering proposal, which they put forward, which was one of the few instances of democratic gerrymandering, and it got a substantial amount of pushback. Every good government group in the state, League of Women Voters, everybody came out against it, and it was still going to happen, except then it got national play. And, you had Obama administration officials coming out against it. And at that point, it just was too high profile. So in something like that, you can push back against them. But the way that they stay in power is not by pleasing the voters. They stay in power by, I would say, deceiving the voters through the ballot and through all these other institutional mechanisms that I mentioned.
I interrupted you before when you were about to get started on the primary ballot. Can you talk a little bit about the structure of the primary ballot and how that is a mechanism for ensuring electoral outcomes?
Sure. I think it's probably the mechanism. So New Jersey primary ballots do not look like primary ballots in any other state in the country, nor in Washington, D.C. I actually looked at multiple counties in every state. You can't look at every primary ballot. There are millions of them. But I looked at primary ballots in every state, looking at the larger counties, which are responsible for most of the voters. And what I saw were basically there are two models nationally. The most popular one is you have the office is listed, and beneath that are the people running for that office. And there's little bubbles that you fill for each one, whoever you want to select for each office. The other model is, there's the office listed, and on the right of it are the people running for that office. In New Jersey, in 19 of our 21 counties, we have something called the county line. And people who voted in New Jersey their whole lives may not even register that our ballots are different, but they are really, really different. So what the county line does is it takes every person who's been endorsed by the county level party organization and puts them on an either vertical or horizontal line on the ballot. And then anyone who's not endorsed is put on a separate column or a separate line. And sometimes they're multiple columns away from the endorsed candidates. And the endorsed candidates, this is what we're talking about with the county, when we say the county line, are often in the best position on the ballot. They're usually in the first or second column. And then that column is headed by whatever the highest ranking office in that cycle is. So this time it'll be the president. In an off-year election, you might have, the governor or a senator, or in New Jersey's legislature, because we're off cycle with the federal elections, you might have a state senator. But whoever is the highest, most likely to be known by the voter's position is at the top of the line. And so what it tends to do is it kind of encourages the voter just to go straight down the line and vote for everyone who's been endorsed. And many of those people they won't know. They might know the U.S. senator, but they won't know like the county freeholders, which are not even going to be called freeholders anymore. But they won't know those local and county level positions. And so it just encourages them to vote straight down and support the people who've been anointed by the party organization. And when you hear party organization, you might think, oh, this is a democratic process. Everybody who knows the political system gets together and they democratically decide who's going to get endorsed. That's not how it works. There are a few counties in New Jersey where it actually does kind of work like that. For example, Mercer has a primary decision-making process through a convention where all the locally elected county committee members, and there's hundreds of them from all over Mercer County, come together and they decide who's going to get endorsed. But in most counties, it's basically a couple of guys or maybe a woman or two in a room. It's really very much like what you envision, 150 years ago, smoke-filled rooms with party insiders minus the smoke. So it's not a democratic process. And you saw that play out in this election cycle as well. And we can talk about that in terms of Congressional District 2 in South Jersey. So the ballot is really powerful. This county line is incredibly powerful. I would say virtually deterministic in who wins the primary election.
Right. In this case, you got to run with Joe Biden, essentially, in the
Yes.
election. So let's
Yes.
talk about the primary that just happened. How did this play out? How did it affect the primary we just had on July 7th?
Right. So, the votes are obviously not fully totaled. We are still waiting for provisional ballots, but it's fairly clear what has happened. I don't think we have any really outstanding races left. And I'll just focus on a couple of examples, but you see this consistently, play out across the state. But I'll just give you a couple of sort of top lines. So I mentioned the 2nd Congressional District. This is the district that Jeff Van Drew represents in Congress, and he was a Democrat. And then in December, he said that he could not support President Trump's impeachment, and he became a Republican. And within a couple of days of that, Bridget Harrison, who is a professor in Montclair, declared that she's going to run for that seat. And within 2 days of her declaring, she had been endorsed by Senate President Steve Sweeney and by 6 of the 8 Democratic Party chairmen who are in that congressional district. It's a district that includes 8 counties. Some just have like a town or 2 towns, but others, it's the entire county is in that district. So 6 of the 8 chairs, who are all part of or have been traditionally part of this South Jersey machine that I mentioned, the George Norcross kind of heads, all endorsed Bridget Harrison before anyone else really even had a chance to announce. Subsequently, and 4 other candidates declared. And the most prominent among them was Amy Kennedy, who is married to former Senator Ted Kennedy's son. So she, has a lot of name recognition from her family, and she had resources. And so it was a very interesting campaign. And what happened was the 6 counties that endorsed Bridget Harrison gave her the line. So in those 6 counties, she had the right to be on that column, except one of those is Salem County, which does not have a line. 2 counties don't have a line, and Salem is one of them. 2 of the 8 counties did not endorse Bridget Harrison. 1 didn't endorse anybody, Ocean County, and 1 county, Atlantic, endorsed Amy Kennedy, and it had a popular vote, which is how she got the endorsement, as opposed to the 6 guys who just said, okay, we're going to give this to Bridget Harrison. So it was a really interesting campaign, and Amy Kennedy, it was a blowout. Amy Kennedy won every one of the 8 counties. And so you might say, well, then, what good did the line do, right? But her win was so powerful that the line could not stop her, but you still saw a substantial impact from the line. Let me give you some examples. The percentage of the total vote that Amy Kennedy got varied by 32 percentage points in these 8 counties. In Gloucester, which is one of the 6 that endorsed Bridget Harrison, she got 45% of the vote. She still won Gloucester, but it was just a much smaller win. In Atlantic, which endorsed her and gave her the line, she got 77% of the vote. That's a huge swing. And you might say, well, that's just those 2 counties. There might be other variables, right? In the 3 counties where Amy Kennedy either had the line, no one had the line, or in the case of Salem, Bridget Harrison had the line, but there was no line physically on the ballot. It was a normal looking ballot. Amy Kennedy won 74% of the vote. In the 5 counties where Bridget Harrison had the line, Amy Kennedy won so far 51% of the vote. That's a huge differential.
Right.
And the only real substantive difference is, the line. Basically,
right?
She was endorsed in
Salem. That's
someone else was
fascinating.
endorsed in Salem. And like, if you have time for one more quick example.
Yep, sure.
This one's actually in Mercer. It's Congressional District 4, and you had 3 candidates. 1 candidate got the line in Mercer, Christine Comforti, and 1 candidate got the line in Monmouth and Ocean, Stephanie Schmidt. Stephanie Schmidt is winning Monmouth and Ocean by 73 and 78%. And Christine Conforti is winning Mercer, which was the county she got, by 58%. But here, so the line is, again, the only difference is who got the line.
Right.
There's not really any substantive difference. But here's the other interesting thing. So in Mercer, there's this weird quirk where if you get a certain percentage of the vote in the convention, you can be on the line even if you don't have the endorsement of the Democratic Party. And so what happened is in Mercer, they put both Christine Conforti and Stephanie Schmidt on the line, one beneath the other. But everybody's used to just going down the line and voting. And we don't have machines to stop overvotes in this particular cycle because everybody voted by paper. So what happened? Two candidates on the line, people went down and voted for both of them.
Right.
Almost a third of the ballots were disqualified.
Wow.
28% right now are either, mostly overvotes. We don't actually know the breakdown yet of how many were overvotes or undervotes, but I'm guessing probably 26 or 27% of the 28% were overvotes because the line is so ingrained in New Jersey voters. They don't even look to see how many people they should vote for. They just go down the column and vote.
Right.
For everyone in there.
Those are great examples. Let's end up by bringing this back to policy. We've had a lot of our podcast episodes on the various crises we're facing: COVID-19, the recession, the racial protests after the George Floyd murder.
Right.
What is the effect of all of these machine politics, power allocation, etc., on actual policy that affects people?
Right. It's so many impacts. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of this you don't see play out. It's sort of in the background. And that general sense people have that New Jersey is corrupt, it's all those little deals that are happening behind the scenes and that this enables. But on a more kind of more visible level, a couple of things I would point to. So you mentioned, COVID and, the economic situation. So Steve Sweeney has, up until very recently, so there's a huge budget shortfall, right? There was a projected budget shortfall of $10 billion initially in terms of the rest of this last fiscal year and the start of the next fiscal year. And Governor Murphy said, we're going to need to expand our borrowing capacity because otherwise we're going to have dramatic cuts. That's a quarter of our state budget. We would have to devastate our schools, health services, everything. So we've got to borrow to try to get through this and hope that the federal government will step in. And for a long time, Steve Sweeney said, no, I don't think that makes sense. It's not appropriate, sounding an awful lot like basically President Trump and other Republicans. And you might say, well, he's just a conservative guy. He's from South Jersey. Certainly that's part of it. But I think that the policies that are not really popular with the state at large, you can get away with them if you don't have to worry about the voters. And so that's one of the ways that this plays out on the ground, this ability to control the legislature, the ability to get reelected without really worrying about what the voters want. Another example is the millionaire's tax. Mm-hmm. I think the legislature passed it under Christie 4 or 5 times, and Sweeney has refused to put it up for a vote, even though it's very popular, overwhelmingly popular. And we could use the revenue.
Right.
And then there's the indirect examples. I'll give you just one. The legislature, the Senate Judiciary Committee approves the most powerful authorities and boards around the state, judgeships. And so the governor gets to nominate people, but he can't actually put them in office. They has to be voted on by the Senate Judiciary Committee, which means it's controlled by Sweeney. And so the Governor Christie and Sweeney jointly appointed a whole bunch of those positions that were vacant in the last year before Murphy took over, because it became apparent that Murphy was going to be the Democratic nominee. There was a very good chance he was going to win. And so Sweeney and Christie basically staffed all of these positions, including, for example, the State Board of Education. They put 8 people on a 13-member board, and they have not, Christie's gone, but Sweeney has not allowed Murphy to replace any of those people, even though they're Republican appointees. Many of them disagree, dramatically with Murphy on policy and education policy. Overall, more than 40% of Murphy's nominees for judiciary positions, for boards, for commissions have not been approved. And this is a Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor, right?
Right.
So when you don't have to worry, when the stuff is not in front of people's eyes because there's not a strong media, and when you don't have to worry about re-election, it's very possible to do things that are wildly unpopular and get away with them.
Wow. Well, on that depressing note, I think we will end today's conversation. Julia, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. It was
Uh,
really fun. It went very fast.
you can read Julia's article in the American Prospect. It's really informative and a deep dive into the history of how New Jersey got to where it is today. I'd also like to thank our production team, Tamara Swedberg, Amy Cobb, and Karen Olson. We will be back next week with another talk from another expert from the Blaustein School. Until then, thanks for listening and stay safe.